welcome Lisa, who is going to be playing us some beautiful in-gathering prelude music. Good morning, everyone. And welcome to First Parish Brewster. We are a Unitarian and Universalist welcoming congregation of people of different philosophies and beliefs, people of various cultures and races, sexual orientations, gender identities, abilities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. So whoever you are, wherever you are on your path, may this be a place of rest and restoration on your journey. For those of you who may be first-time visitors among us, welcome. Welcome on this morning, which we make sacred by our presence together. A big welcome as well to people who are joining us today on the virtual live stream. We are so glad you are here. Let's give them a wave. I'm Reverend Bran Lennox. I'm the lead minister here at First Parish Brewster, and today happens to be my first official Sunday worshiping with you all. Thank you. I am joyful to be welcoming you to the service with our worship associate, John Kelb. And our services are recorded and available after the fact on our YouTube channel midweek. We do ask that all over the age of 4 wear a mask while in our buildings. This means using an appropriate face covering which fully covers your nose and mouth and sits flat against your cheeks. Wearing a face covering can take some adjustment, so I'll be reminding you periodically to make sure that it hasn't slipped down. But by masking, we demonstrate care for each other's health and well-being, and we uphold the first, second, fifth, and seventh principles of Unitarian Universalism. So please take a moment to check that your cell phone is on silent, and we ask that everybody wear a name tag or fill out a sticker name tag after the service in an effort to be more welcoming to everybody. We also welcome the noises, movements, and mirth that little ones bring to our services. Our community news announcements can be found by looking at our newsletter, The Angle. Next Sunday, you are invited to join us for a service led by yours truly and worship associate Margaret Royce Moore. I'll be sharing a bit more about myself and my call to ministry as I preach about the unexpected blessings that can come out of our failures. All are welcome next Sunday at 10 a.m. Welcome to our service today. It is so good to be together.
Life can disrupt our best laid plans. Living with intention, love, and being inspired by others can provide blessings that help us through even tragic disruptions. On Memorial Day weekend in 2013, my brother Mike called me. His daughter Catherine hadn't been well, and the doctor sent her to the hospital for tests. The news was terrible. My 30-year-old niece had stage 4 cancer. Marcia and I spent a lot of time with Mike, our sister-in-law Karen, and Catherine during her treatment. It was about a year later when cancer took Catherine from this world. At her memorial service, I shared a story that exemplified her kind, gentle nature and love of animals. One vacation, she sat in a kayak watching loons on a New Hampshire lake. And she was so still and quiet that the loons actually gathered around her for a while. When she returned to the shore, full of joy, she exclaimed, "I was a loon." When Catherine was undergoing cancer treatment, our daughter Christina was living in Columbus, Ohio, and she volunteered to support a bike ride to raise money for cancer research. Over the following years, some of Catherine's friends and family rode in honor of Catherine. Although I did not ever have the intention of being a cycling enthusiast, riding to support cancer research led me there. What started as a goal to be able to do the 45-mile ride and hopefully keep up with Catherine's sister Laura has led me to riding 3,600 miles last year. Although none of those miles can bring Catherine back to us, the activity keeps Catherine in my memory. Raising money for cancer research brings hope to others in their journey with cancer. Gobbling up cycling miles on Cape Cod brings me joy as it takes me to areas of great beauty. When I ride with my niece Laura, or my daughter Christina, or my son Nathan, I don't have to worry about keeping up, and those rides are especially meaningful to me. As we light our chalice today, we look forward to making our time hopeful and joyful, as we also honor the lives of those whose time was cut short.
Please rise with me in body or in spirit, and join in singing hymn number 153, "Oh, I woke up this morning, my mind stayed on Him."
Stay
the front of the sanctuary for our temporal ages. I'm going to come sit with you down here. All right, good morning, dear ones. I am Reverend Bran, and I'm very excited to be meeting all of you today. It is my very first Sunday as your minister. And because I'm so excited to be sharing this time with you, I thought we could celebrate together by talking about one of my favorite stories. It's a story about how time is a lot more complicated than we really might think. So first of all, I'll let you in on a secret. Time is not real. It's not even a thing. It's what's called a social construct, which means that people made it up. We tend to measure things based on time, like how fast somebody could throw a baseball, or how far away the next city is. But when we look at science, we realize that time isn't something that always stays the same. Like how much stuff something is made out of, that always stays the same. Time is just a way that human beings have decided to talk about our world based on the ways that our brains work to observe the universe that we live in. But just because something is this social construct doesn't mean that it's not important. Without these agreed upon ways of looking at things, it gets really hard to work together with other human beings. Here's an example of time as a useful social idea. Who here has a bedtime? Raise your hand. Do you have a bedtime? Could you shout out what time your bedtime is? All right. And is bedtime different for you versus your siblings or other members of your family? Yeah? Did you want to say? No, okay. All right. So for some of us, bedtime is different from others of us. And what about on special holidays like the one we just had on New Year's Eve? Bedtime might be at a different time on New Year's Eve than it is on other days of the year if we decide to stay up with our families to celebrate the New Year. Even the moment that we call midnight on New Year's Eve, though, that's just something that people made up together. We could pick any day and decide it was New Year's Day, and it wouldn't change anything, except where we agreed to start counting. Okay, so not only is time a social idea, but even when we're talking about something like how long it takes for a second to go by, when we look really closely using science, we find out that time acts in some pretty funny ways. Scientists like Albert Einstein, have you heard of Albert Einstein before? What about my favorite scientist, Stephen Hawking? Those two taught us about this. This kind of scientist measures a lot of the laws of the universe based on the idea that the speed of light is something that never ever changes. No matter who you are, where you are, or what you're doing, light always goes the same speed. It always goes 299,794,458 meters per second, which means that light goes from the moon to our eyeballs in just over 1 second of time. No, the speed of light never changes, but what does change is the length of a second, and that's pretty confusing. Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking taught us a story about this idea, which is called the twins paradox. Have you ever heard the word paradox before? Raise your hand if you've heard the word paradox. It's a pretty cool word, and it means a situation that seems like it should not be true, based on our basic understanding of the world. The twins paradox is like that. As kids, you have the special gift of being able to imagine impossible things. So let's imagine this paradox together. You can close your eyes if it helps you imagine, or you can keep them open. And when you're ready, you to imagine that you have an identical twin. For some of you, that's not hard to imagine because you might already have one. But I want you to picture you and your twin, and you are exactly the same age, and you've lived your lives up to this point together, doing all of the same things together. And now imagine that someone has invented really, really fast space travel, and you can go visit other planets almost as fast as the speed of light can get you there. So you decide to go take a trip in the space shuttle that can go almost as fast as the speed of light, and your twin decides that they would rather stay on the Earth. So you give them a nice see you soon hug, and you climb in your spaceship, and you travel all over the place. You see some amazing planets and moons and stars and comets and maybe even some nebulas. And when you decide that you're ready to come home, you've been gone for a couple of years, you're ready to see your family again, you get back to Earth, and you climb out of your super fast space shuttle, and when you see your twin, you can hardly believe it, because somehow your twin is now older than you are. Like noticeably older than you are. A whole lot more time has passed on the Earth than for you in your spaceship. Now that sounds like it couldn't possibly be true, but this phenomenon has actually been tested in an experiment using airplanes and really fancy clocks. So, that's my message for you today. Time is flexible. We can play around with it. Science tells us all sorts of ways that our universe is wild and amazing, and we are finding out new ideas like this all the time. So now go and do with that knowledge whatever you want to. We'll now send you out to your activities. Thanks for joining me for our story. We may not have prepared Lisa for this song, so if you know it by heart, just go ahead and sing it. Shift gears a little bit, and I'll ask you to join me now on this day of so much complexity in the spirit of prayer. And to prepare yourself for the spirit of prayer, make sure that your mask is covering your nose and mouth. Thank you. Blessed is our complicated grief. In the shadow of heartbreak and the throes of loss, it is our love that breaks us open again and again like waves against the rocks. When we are wandering, lost as though through an endless and unfamiliar desert, what keeps us going? In our confusion, let us open our awareness. Let us notice that still, small voice which is always with us, no matter how lost we might be. We are the created and the creator. We are always taking part in making the world, even as the world makes us. Let us feel both our vastness and our minuteness, knowing that we are both the entire cosmos and just a brief candle flame. Let us remember in this knowing that hope is not a thing which is delivered to us from a source on high. Let us not idle, expecting the mending to come to us from a mysterious Savior. Let us not wait our entire earthly lives, however long or short they may be, believing that all will be made perfect in the next. nor is hope a thing which a person alone can generate. Isolated, we cannot exert healing in our lives or in the world. No person alone has the power to find meaning amid the broken stones at the bottom of the valley. Not from without, nor from within, but all-encompassing. We find the power to continue our seeking in that sacred thing which connects and creates us, which depends on our participation, but goes on without end, before and after our brief existence. When we gather in the name of justice, when we gather in the name of healing, when we gather in the act of faith which says that it is worth trying, no matter how small we each might be, something beyond us appears. Appear with us now, O Presence, and unite our broken hearts to create the holy here in this place. When smoke and shadows loom above us, show us that we are larger than fear. When life and health are threatened and liberty is denied, remind us of our shared power. When loved ones and champions and strangers alike are lost to death, comfort us with the patience and compassion to sit together through the pain of mourning. Just as our Jewish siblings and sisters and brothers pray words of praise and unbreakable faith and undying hope during this and all other times of heartbreak, together let us pray today. Blessed are you, holder of grief and giver of healing, creator and created, blessed is your name. May you bring peace to us and to all the world. Amen. And now let us continue our prayer with a moment of shared silence. Each week, we have the practice of splitting our offertory plate. Half of what is collected goes to the works of First Parish, and the other half goes to a worthy organization nominated by someone in the congregation. Today, our split plate goes to Cape Cod Verdian Museum and Cultural Center. The Cape Cod Verdian Museum and Cultural Center promotes the history, culture, and contemporary life of Cape Verdean migrants, as well as other Lusophone communities and their families in the region. The Museum and Cultural Center has a collection of some 1,000 artifacts related to Cabo Verde, Cape Verdean, and other Lusophone migration. The collection includes photographs, textiles, masks, popular and fine art, original documents, genealogy resources, and a library. Public celebrations of history, culture, art, and music, seminars that engage social and racial inequality, and workshops on farming practices, quilting, music, language appreciation, and lessons in Crioulo and Portuguese are all planned for 2022. For more information, please visit their website. Your offering will benefit this organization and the great work of this congregation, so please give as generously as possible. There are a couple of ways you can give today. You can text to give, the number is in your order of service, or you can put a check or cash in the offertory basket. Or for those streaming in, you can donate on our website. However you choose to give today, your generosity is appreciated. The offertory will now be gratefully received.
Little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin'. A big wheel run by faith, little wheel run by the grace of God. A wheel in a wheel, way in the middle of the middle of the middle of the, way in the middle of the air. Little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin'. Some wanna sing and shout, for 6 months they're all turned out. See what you see up there, way in the middle of the middle of the middle of the, way in the middle of the air. Little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin'. Little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin', little wheel a turnin', turnin', little wheel a turnin'. Way in the middle of the middle of the middle of the middle of the, way in the middle of the middle of the middle of the, way in the middle of the air. Our reading this morning comes from the words that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King preached in 1962 in Atlanta. Our sermon today brings us face to face with one of the most agonizing problems of human experience. Very few, if any of us, are able to see all of our hopes fulfilled. So many of the hopes and promises of our mortal days are unrealized. Each of us, like Schubert, begins composing a symphony that is never finished. There is much truth in George Frederick Watts' imaginative portrayal of hope in his picture entitled Hope. He depicts Hope as seated atop our planet, but her head is sadly bowed and her fingers are plucking one unbroken harp string. Who has not had to face the agony of blasted hopes and shattered dreams? Life is full of this experience. There is hardly anyone here this morning who has not set out for some momentous goal, some glorious realization, only to find that we had to settle for much less. Life seems to have a fatal flaw, and history seems to have an irrational and unpredictable streak. Ultimately, we all die not having received what was promised. Our dreams are constantly tossed and blown by staggering winds of disappointment. What does one do under such circumstance? This is a central question, for we must determine how to live in a world where our highest hopes are not fulfilled. One way that people respond to life's disappointments is to adopt a philosophy of fatalism. This is the idea that whatever happens must happen, and that all events are determined by necessity. Fatalism implies something foreordained and inescapable. The people who subscribe to this philosophy follow a course of absolute resignation. They resign themselves to what they consider their fate. They see themselves as little more than helpless orphans thrown out in the terrifying immensities of space. Since they believe that man has no freedom, they seek neither to deliberate nor to make decisions. They wait passively for external forces to deliberate and decide for them. They never actively seek to change their circumstances, since they believe that all circumstances, like the Greek tragedies, are controlled by irresistible and foreordained forces. Often, the fatalists are very religious people who see God as the determiner and controller of destiny. Everything, they feel, is God's will, however evil it happens to be. For one to sink in the quicksands of this type of fatalism is both intellectually and psychologically stifling. Since freedom is a part of the essence of man, the fatalist, in his denial of freedom, becomes a puppet and not a person. He is right in his conviction that there is no absolute freedom, and that freedom always operates within the framework of predestined structure. Thus, a man is free to go north from Atlanta to Washington, or south from Atlanta to Miami, but he is not free to go north to Miami or south to Washington. Freedom is always within destiny, but there is freedom. We are both free and destined. Freedom is the act of deliberating, deciding, and responding within our destined nature. Even if destiny prevents us our going to some attractive Spain, there still remains in us the capacity to take this disappointment, to answer it, to make our individual response to it, to stand up to it and do something with it. Fatalism doesn't see this. It leaves the individual stymied and helplessly inadequate for life. What, then, is the answer? We must accept our unwanted and unfortunate circumstance and yet cling to radiant hope. The answer lies in developing the capacity to accept the finite disappointment and yet cling to the infinite hope. In speaking of acceptance, I do not mean the grim, bitter acceptance of those who are fatalistic. I mean the kind of acceptance that Jeremiah achieved as expressed in the words, "This is my grief and I must bear it." This means sitting down and honestly confronting your shattered dream. Don't follow the escapist method of trying to put it out of your mind. Place it at the forefront of your mind and stare daringly at it. Almost anything that happens to us can be woven into the purposes of God. It may lengthen our cords of sympathy. It may break our self-centered pride. We as a people have long dreamed of freedom, but we are still confined to an oppressive prison of segregation and discrimination. Must we respond to this disappointed hope with bitterness and cynicism? Certainly not, for this will only distort and poison our personality. Must we conclude that the existence of segregation is a part of the will of God and thereby resign ourselves to the fate of oppression? Of course not. For such a course would be blasphemy, because it attributes to God something that should be attributed to the devil. Moreover, to accept passively an unjust system is to cooperate with that system. Thereby, the oppressed become as evil as the oppressor. Our most fruitful course of action will be to stand up with a courageous determination, moving on non-violently amid obstacles and setbacks, facing disappointments and yet clinging to the hope. It will be this determination and final refusal to be stopped that will eventually open the door of fulfillment. Of course, some of us will die having not received the promise of freedom, but we must continue to move on. On the one hand, we must accept the finite disappointment. But in spite of this, we must maintain the infinite hope. This is the only way that we will be able to live without the fatigue of bitterness and the drain of resentment. And so ends today's reading.
Thank you, John, for sharing those powerful words with us today. So as I mentioned earlier, we find ourselves together today in a pretty complicated moment. I would love to let my sermon stand for itself, but because it was an absolute work of love to write it, I think the only right thing is to name our truths first, directly, and let them be held so that we can be fully present together. This morning, many in our community are still grieving the loss of Penelope Ann, infant daughter of beloved minister Reverend Jessica Clay. Many of us are also grieving recent pains and losses in our personal lives. We find ourselves entering into a third year of the devastating COVID-19 pandemic, with no signs of back to normal in sight. I am finding myself in the pulpit for the first time as an ordained minister with no training wheels on. And late last night, a synagogue in Texas made the news when a man committed an act of anti-Semitic violence and took 4 hostages from them for a number of hours. Blessedly, all the hostages were returned physically unharmed, but the suspect was killed during the proceedings, and I find myself stricken with sadness that he chose this terrible act as his last one. I'm holding space also for the pain and re-traumatization of my Jewish family and friends as they continue to face the dangers of anti-Semitism in this world. And it is also Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Day weekend. And this is a day when we celebrate Dr. King's incredible accomplishments for civil rights, while also mourning the violent act of white supremacy that took his life from us. Today, we may also find ourselves put in mind of a whole host of other Black leaders who shared their excellence with the world and died too soon, either as a direct result of white supremacy or from the long-term effects of living in a society that is built on racism. This is a lot to hold, but my call to ministry is a call to combat the belief in scarcity anywhere it arises. So I'll invite you to have faith with me when I say there is room for all of this and much more here in this space today. There is space enough for us to continue learning new wisdom from the legacy of Dr. King and his contemporaries. There is room for passion and joy and inspiration alongside all of this sorrow. And my passion for learning was sparked this week when I took a look at the anthem that Kevin chose for the choir and I ended up directing, and I'll invite you to join me on a journey through the history of that song, which we just heard. The words go, Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. Now, the first level of discovery when inspecting this beloved spiritual is realizing that it is ostensibly making a reference to the prophet Ezekiel's visions in the original testament of the Bible. On closer inspection, however, a mystery appears. These words have little or nothing in common with the original story. In the Bible, Ezekiel says he saw God sitting on a throne that looked like it was made of sapphire, and there are actually 4 wheels, not 1 or perhaps 8 wheels, depending on how you're counting, each attached like some kind of metaphysical appendage to 4 cherubim who appear as dreadful amalgamations of faces, wings, eyes, and flame. These cherubim, mythological guardians of sacred space, make up the pillars on which the throne of God is perched. In the throes of this vision, Ezekiel says God calls him to do some pretty intense things in order to bring about justice for and among the Israelites. So a wheel is very much not the point of this chapter or any chapter of the book of Ezekiel, which begs the question, where did this song come from? To understand more about this, first we need to take a look at the history of spiritual songs. African American spirituals were about survival. Survival both of the body and the soul for enslaved people. Victims of American slavery were prevented by threat of brutality and death from communicating with each other with messages of hope and freedom in the slavers' attempt to exert total control over them. However, it would be going against the common Christian beliefs of the time to prevent them from singing and praying about the Bible. The enslaved people, being indomitably resourceful in their fight for survival, began using Bible stories as codified language to send messages to each other. In such ways, Black Christianity developed in the United States as a very literal, very real, and present form of salvation for those oppressed by a very real and very present non-metaphorical evil. Enslaved people's connection to God was literally saving them, and Ezekiel's wheel happens to be one of those codified messages of salvation. Now, the symbol of the wheel was particularly meaningful for survivors of the Middle Passage for 2 rather powerful reasons. First, it is a syncretic symbol, meaning that it is a fusion of 2 or more religious traditions formed by a cultural overlap between different belief systems. A multitude of archaeological sites from former plantations in the American South have turned up religious artifacts, combining the image of the wagon wheel with something called the Bakongo cosmogram. The Bakongo were a huge and influential West African culture, and I say were rather than are, not because the civilization no longer exists, but because they were so relentlessly plundered by the slave trade that the Kingdom of Congo was destabilized, colonized, and annexed beyond recognition by the year 1900. Almost half of the people trafficked overseas to the state of South Carolina originated in the Bakongo culture. A prominent religious symbol for this group is the aforementioned cosmogram. This is a
rather pleasant word for map of the spiritual cosmos. This particular cosmogram looks like a double circle, or wheel within a wheel, with the center divided into 4 equal portions by a circumscribed plus sign. There are many, many meanings related to this symbol, but one simplified angle is that the vertical line represents the divide between the mundane and the spiritual, and the horizontal line divides the world of the living from the world of the dead. The circles represent the power of water and the journey of the sun as it cycles daily through the world of the living and the world of the dead, creating a cycle of birth and renewal. People being trafficked to America brought this symbol and this cosmology along with them. The most common Christian interpretation of the wheel symbol is a reminder that God has the power to create a just world by turning the wheel, so that the people who were resting above all of the others will find themselves beneath, and those who were downtrodden will be lifted up. Enslaved people not only found in this symbol a connection to their cultural roots, they also found a promise that they would not be at the bottom of the wheel forever, that better days would come. This is an idea worth singing about. The wheel is turning, everybody. We are going to be lifted up. Some want to sing and shout before 6 months. They're all turned out. Salvation is found in the inevitability of change in the passage of time. Now, a wheel symbolizing the passage of time is familiar from a variety of religions that we might be familiar with. We humans love our cycles, and to be fair, we are permanently in a state of orbit, so it makes sense that we should resonate with going around and around and around. Pervasive, too, is the idea that the passage of time is a salvific promise. Nearly all of us have been told, at some point, this too shall pass, and perhaps some of you have even been comforted by that. So, pain comes and goes, and oppression isn't forever. Though, as Dr. King often preached, the latter is only true if we actively do something about it. But what are the limits of this idea of the passage of time? What are the limits? There are things that time cannot do. And the first thing that time cannot do is tell us how much a human life is worth. It just doesn't work that way. Each second that someone is alive, they hold 100% of the importance that it is possible for a human being to hold. You cannot compare one life to another in worth because we're all infinitely whole, infinitely loved, infinitely worthy. And that's true whether a life lasts 99 years or just a few days. Time is also useless in measuring human life because we simply have no control over the length of each of our time on earth. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's life was taken from him after 39 years on this planet. And yes, he accomplished incredible things in that time. Truly, he made the most of living for something that he felt was worth dying for. But I think even more important than making the most of the time we ourselves have is the power that we have as community to make each other loved beyond time. My life has been changed by many who have died far too young, and several who have lived good long lives too. Dr. King once spoke of the premature deaths of 2 of his heroes, Mahatma Gandhi and Abraham Lincoln, and he emphasized the quote, "Now he belongs to the ages." Every life belongs to the ages, if we hold it in reverence. As I mentioned to the children earlier, time is a social concept, and we are social creatures with the power to use it in complex ways. By honoring those around me, living or dead, I can love them beyond time. By acting on the compassions that each life has inspired in me, I can help lift them to the ages. Speaking of lost loved ones, however, time has another limitation to my mind. There's this tricky tendency that time has of stopping in moments when we are feeling the most grief. It's pretty commonly described by people who are suffering some kind of untenable loss. If the pain is severe enough, it's as though the clock freezes between each tick of the second hand, Makes me think of another pesky truism, time heals all wounds. I have two problems with that one. First, by the same logic, time also brings all wounds to pass. And then there's the issue where, for time to bring healing, it requires some degree of forward motion. The longest years of my life have been spent over the course of an hour, sitting in bed, trying to juggle such tasks as breathing and blinking in a world struck incomprehensible by grief. This feeling of time stopped by pain is one of the scariest concepts I can imagine. And understandably, we tend to shield ourselves from ever feeling like that in all sorts of ways. In today's reading, Dr. King describes fatalism as one such type of avoidance. But time-stopping pain doesn't only happen on a personal scale. It is exactly that scary and exactly that painful to take in and fully conceptualize the magnitude of racial injustice in this country, past and present. The experience of encountering that brokenness comes to different people differently, especially as a result of their race. People of color don't get the luxury of a choice. The reminders come up everywhere, sometimes multiple times per day. White people sometimes miss the full truth of it because our focus is disrupted by feelings of white guilt or feelings of helplessness. But one way or another, if and when we each find ourselves fully facing the truth of this legacy of agony, if we allow the fire of that truth to burn past our defenses, the heart screams and the nervous system goes into sympathetic overdrive and the clock stops. My dear people of color who are joining us today, I have to ask your forbearance and forgiveness for a moment because I'm going to commit the iniquity of preaching past you. But I need to have a word with my fellow white people. My dear white people, you and I have the merciful option of not experiencing this pain daily. Some of our racial compatriots go our whole lives avoiding feeling it, and they get away with it too. But our compassion is thin and empty if we close ourselves off to this. So here is my advice and my challenge to you, my fellow white people, and it's a challenge to myself too. Make a practice of feeling the agony of racial injustice regularly and on purpose. Let yourself be grief-stricken and horrified. Alone in your home, let yourself cry and rage about it, and let your heart burn and accept that you have no good words for the horror of what has been done to all of these thinking, feeling, loving human beings for no better reason than profit. Let this grief connect you to everyone who is still living under the heel of white supremacy today, which is ultimately all of us. And then remind yourself that no one can bring an end to this pain as long as even one person is still oppressed or marginalized. The atrocities enacted upon Black bodies and spirits are happening to your own beloved family. And you and I must enter into the struggle for justice and equity with the same fervid drive we would bring to ending the pain of our own siblings, parents, and children. It has to be personal. Reverend Dr. King and many of his fellow civil rights leaders understood the imperativeness of collective liberation. He recognized that the global presence of anti-Semitism, the American invasion of Vietnam at the time, the international forces of imperialism, and the pervasive local workings of classism were all threats to the dream of racial justice. To carry out his work, we must all sense ourselves and our connection to each other within this crucial struggle. Time stands still when injustice is allowed to persist, and it's up to each of us to fulfill the promise of Ezekiel's wheel and move the clock ahead toward the hour of liberation. Let us lift Dr. King's life to the ages by carrying his work beyond the time he was given here. May we have the courage to stay impassioned by this dream, even when we are faced with an onslaught of stressors which threaten to drag us down into the feelings of helplessness and despair. May we be blessed to see the wheel turn and real change happen within our own lifetimes. Amen. And now rise with me in body and spirit. We're going to sing our closing hymn, There's a River Flowing in My Soul. Benediction here. I'm wearing some hats today. All right, so these words come from the Reverend Dr. Tandika. She says, despair is my private pain born from what I have failed to say, failed to do, failed to overcome. Be still, my inner self. Let me rise to you. Let me reach down into your pain and soothe you. This common world I love anew as the lifeblood of generations who refuse to surrender their humanity in an inhumane world courses through my veins. From within this world, my despair is transformed to hope, and I begin anew the legacy of caring. Go in peace now to love and care for one another. You may be seated. Fellowship hour is suspended indefinitely due to the pandemic, and please remain seated while we enjoy and appreciate our postlude.